Hello, family. Today we're going to look in the Bible of what it speaks about the investigative judgment. Now, we're talking about this because the Bible does speak of judgment, and the Christian world has a false conception of what is judgment. To them, they believe that when a person dies, they get judged by Christ immediately, whether to be thrown in hell forever, which is not true, or whether to be in heaven. Now, the Bible doesn't teach this. The Bible teaches that there are three judgments in the Bible. You have the first judgment, which is the judgment of the wicked, which is the judgment of the wicked and the righteous, which is the investigative judgment. Now, this judgment is the judgment that's going on right now as we speak, not when we die. Right now as we speak, God is judging the world in the heavenly sanctuary that John saw in the book of Revelation that was open. That's the first judgment. The second judgment is the judgment of the millennium, of the 1,000 years, where the saints will reign with God in heaven and judge the fallen angels. That's the second judgment. Then you have the third judgment, which is the judgment after the millennium, after the 1,000 years, where Christ comes and the wicked are obliterated. Now, there's a lot of things we could talk about there, but I'm just trying to make it short. I'm trying to make it simple so we can understand. Now, today, we're going to talk about the investigative judgment, the judgment that's going on right now as we speak. God is judging our actions, our thoughts, and everything that we are doing right now. Now, there's an interesting thing because the Bible teaches that we are judged by the law, the 10 Commandments. Now I'm going to give you a Bible verse to show you this. In Romans 2:12 it says, "For as many as has sinned without the law shall perish without the law, for as many as sinned in the law shall be judged by the law." So we see there that judgment is by the law. So it doesn't make no sense when a person tells you that they don't have to keep the law because God is judging you according to the law. Now let's look at judgment. What judgment is going on right now? Well, right now, we're looking at the investigative judgment that's going on right now, where God is doing an investigation, seeing whether the believer is the true believer or the believer is the false believer. He's investigating. Now, God doesn't need to investigate, of course, because he knows all things. But this is the universal battle, where everyone in all the world, because we're not the only life in the universe, are looking in. And God is doing this for the sake of the universe and for the sake of the angels who do not know all things. Now let's look at the investigative judgment, okay? We find the investigative judgment along a lot of places in the Bible, but we'll look at Revelation 14:6. It says, "And I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel, to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people." So here we see that God is saying, go preach. The angel is coming with a message from heaven. He's coming with a message from heaven. There's an emergency message. And he's saying, go preach the everlasting gospel to every single person. It's an emergency because it says he comes flying from the midst of heaven. That means he's zapping from the midst of heaven with this message. Now, let's look at this message of emergency. In verse 7, it tells us what's the message. It says, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God, give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come." So here we read that the everlasting gospel that we're supposed to be preaching right now says that the hour of his judgment is come. So while they're preaching the everlasting gospel, they're preaching that the hour of his judgment has come. So question, are they saying that the hour of his judgment has come after they died, or while the gospel, the everlasting gospel, is being preached? Of course, it's while the everlasting gospel is being preached. So here we see a judgment before the person dies. Now, how can I tell you that? What more proof can I give you to show you that that judgment is before God comes back the second time? Okay. Well, in verse 7, like we just saw, it says, "For the hour of his judgment is come." But then, In verse 14, it says, "And behold, I saw a white cloud." Remember, Jesus said, "You shall see the Son of Man coming in a cloud." "Behold, I saw a white cloud, and upon the cloud one that sat like the Son of Man," that's Jesus, "having upon his head a golden crown and a sharp sickle." This is the second coming. "And I saw another angel coming out the temple, crying for the loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thy to reap, for the harvest is ripe." So here we see in verse 15, the harvest. So in verse 7, verse 6 and 7, it says, "Preach the everlasting gospel and tell them that we are in the trial of judgment." Now, before the second coming comes and we're preaching the everlasting gospel, then Christ comes back and says, the harvest is ripe. Well, according to Matthew 13:39, it says that the harvest is the end of the world. So you see the end of the world in verse 15, and in verse 6 and 7, you have the preaching of the everlasting gospel, which is judgment is come. So here we see a judgment before people die, a judgment that's going on right now, right now, where God is judging us. Now, do we have other examples of judgment in the Bible? Yes, we do. We actually have many examples in the Bible. If you look at Genesis 3, chapter 3, 9 to 24, we see that Adam and Eve, God did an investigation on Adam and Eve before he pronounced his decision in verses 14 to 19. And they were executed and expelled from the garden, verses 23 and 24. We also see that God did an investigation with Cain in Genesis chapter 4, 9 through 16. The investigation was verses 9 to 10. His decision was verses 11 to 12. The execution was verses 16. And we also see with Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 18 verses 16, 19, and 28. He did an investigation in verses 20 and 22. 20 to 22. He made his decision, his verdict was issued in verse 15. And then it was executed in 24 to 25. So God always, before he comes and passes judgment, he does an investigative judgment to see what's going on. Not for himself, but for the sake of the universe. So I just want people to know that right here, right now, we are in the time of judgment. And God is judging the world in his heavenly sanctuary according to Christians, separating the true believer from the false believer, because he's soon to come back. And it said many people will say on my name, "We have cast out demons and devils." That's the false believer. You understand? There's going to be a lot of false believers, and God is separating them because the harvest is soon to come upon us. What happens now?